Okay, so if there's one consistent motif about all the videos that I've made so far, it's that when we're talking about site-specific theatre or performance, pretty much nothing is certain. There's no singular history that leads us to a defined route that leads us to the beginning of what we would consider to be site-specific performance. There's no singular term that seems to account for all the varied types of works that there are. And even the terms we use to describe site-specific performance are contested in and of themselves anyway. So we can pretty much accept that when we're talking about site-specific performance, it's quite a fluid sort of world or form that we're working in. And so it would then follow that there's no one way of working in, of creating site-specific work. It wouldn't make sense for me, therefore, to create a series of videos of kind of like a how-to, this is how you make site-specific work. Rather, what I think would be better to do is to draw on some companies or practitioners who have perhaps a distinctive philosophy or ideas or practices which they have employed when making this type of work, and sort of explore those sort of as case studies, if you like. So that's what I'm going to do for the next few videos anyway, is just basically pick out a number of companies or practitioners and talk about their work and what we might learn from it. And it might be just as kind of to help us navigate towards your own practice, borrow from different companies to help give you a start. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So it's not that I'm saying Wrights and Sites, which is the first company that I'm going to be talking about, is the way to do it. It's just a way, and I'm more interested in drawing out what each company, whether it's Wrights and Sites, Forced Entertainment, Brithgoff, Rimini Protocol, whoever it is that I'm going to be looking at. It's not saying that you should go and do that. It's more just trying to pick out what these companies do. What is it that these companies do that we might borrow or that we might find useful when we're developing our own practice. Okay, so anyway, so I'll move on. So as I said, I'm going to start us off with Wrights and Sites. I suppose I'm going to start with them because that's where I started way back in my third year at QMU when I was first faced with looking at site-specific performance. It was Wrights and Sites that I started with, and so it makes sense for me to begin with them anyway. And I think they give quite a lot of practical advice just straight off the bat that we can just pretty much take for just solid advice that we can really use when we're working on site-specific theatre. Okay, so Wrights and Sites, and I should say, I apologise over the next few videos for any time that I revert to notes. It's a lot of information to give, and I'm basically just taking most of what I'm going to be saying in the next few videos from my master's thesis, so it is my work. So anyway, Wrights and Sites is a group of 4 artist researchers committed to producing experimental site-specific work across a range of media. They formalised as a group in Exeter in 1997, and their 4 core members are Stephen Hodge, Simon Perschetti, Phil Smith and Cathy Turner. Each of these individual group members are all sort of academics in their own right. They've all produced papers either collectively or individually. They all work in relation to some university or another. And if you just go and type in any one of those names individually, you'll probably find something related to site-specific work that would be useful to read anyway. The company themselves are committed to exploring the spatial relationships that emerge from site, city, landscape, and in particular through walking as a practice. I'm going to start you off with an anecdote that Phil Smith has written about himself for one of the very first site-specific practices that he employed with the Wrights and Sites company for a production called the Quay Thing. Quay spelt as in Quay, as in down at the quay, which they did in 1997 or 1998, I think. The anecdote is available to read in a book called Walking, Writing and Performance Autobiographical Texts, which you might find useful to go and see in full. You can find it in Google Books actually if you type it into Google. So yeah, in this anecdote he sort of talks about the Quay Thing and about his early experimentations and what he was trying to do. This is Phil Smith, one of the company members, what he was trying to do as a director with this group down at the quay, in, I think it's in Exeter. I should have really found that out. Anyway, down at a quay somewhere, and basically Phil Smith came from a what you may call a traditional theatre background or a standard theatre background. He was used to working in pros arch or studio spaces. That's the kind of environment he was coming from, a very controlled environment where your audience are static, or usually static, in a quiet auditorium with not a lot to battle against. The problem that he had initially, what he found when he started making work down at the quay, was that he tried to apply the same standards that were applicable to like a studio space or a pros arch theatre to the location that he was in, and that kind of brought up a number of problems for him. He was frustrated because there was sort of interruptions to contend with. When you try and consider site as a backdrop or as just the space where you're for your theatre work, a kind of vessel for your theatre to be in, then you're bound to get raging, because no doubt you're going to end up having to face a number of interruptions by passing traffic or passers-by that are getting sort of interested in what you're doing, or that helicopter that suddenly went over that you weren't expecting. And these are just like, if you're just trying to make a piece of theatre and try and control it and keep that control the same way that you would for a studio space, you're going to get infinitely frustrated trying to contend with all these other elements of the environment that come in. Even something as simple but as fundamental as like the weather, you maybe not have contended with the fact that it could be raining one day and then gloriously sunny the next. So even rehearsals or the performance itself, there's a lot of uncontrollable elements in there that sort of you have to be aware of. He sort of cited noisy traffic, nosy passers-by, and a stink from the nearby factory as all being factors which distracted an audience from the text that was actually set by the company that they were trying to rehearse and perform. What Smith realised, and what is pretty much one of the most fundamental lessons in site-specific performance, is that these interruptions or surprises, as he calls them, these are the specificities of the site, right? It's these things, it's these elements, random or not, that make the work site-specific, that make it, you know, that are the elements that we should not be trying to reject and force away, but we should be trying to involve in the work, that in fact the work is about that. He stated that these spontaneous moments of madness were the moments when the site would perform at the expense of the performance and despite the performance. And it took a long time for him to realise that this was the performance, and that the actor's work should be simply to provoke these specificities, to draw attention to these things that are going on, as opposed to just using the site as a backdrop. So that's just a kind of wee anecdote, but it contextualises the foundations of what Wrights and Sites are all about. Ever since the Quay Thing, Wrights and Sites have set out to investigate and present ways that we as theatre makers, but also as just people living in a place somewhere, might allow sites to perform themselves, as opposed to just using them as a backdrop for our action.